Because this integrated information theory was something that one of my Facebook friends told me about a couple of days ago. The BBC was an article about it, and it's the idea of trying to explain. You know, I was talking before about how consciousness occurs in the brain. Mm-hmm. Now, this integrated information theory says that what is happening is that there are that groups, parts of the brain work together concurrently. Now, this would solve certain problems, like within the brain, there's something called the binding problem. The binding problem is you have a feeling of simultaneity now. You feel your body positioned in space, you can hear my voice, you see things and everything else, as if it's all happening now. Yeah. But if you think about it, different signals are coming from different parts of your body, and they take longer time to get to you. In other words, you know, the feeling in your feet and nerves conductance is slower. Also, there's the sound itself outside is slower than light. Okay. Now, for instance, there's one fascinating experiment to do, and it really is intriguing, I've tried this, is that if you're in an underground garage and somebody's the other side of the garage and they slam their car door, if it is more than 60 metres away, if it's less than 60 metres away, you get a feeling of simultaneity with the sound of the car door. You see the car door slam and you hear the sound. Yeah. But if you think of this logically, that doesn't work, because the sound takes time much slower to get to you than the light does. Mm-hmm. So there should be, you see the car door slam and then a split second later you hear the slam.
I want you to focus your attention on the car all the way down there, the one furthest away. Are you ready? Watch and listen. Now, did you see and hear the door slam shut? Of course you did. But did you happen to notice that the actual sound of the door shutting didn't seem to quite match the visual of the door shutting? Here, let's try it again. You caught the delay this time, didn't you? Well, in the TV and film business, we call this being out of sync. So why does this happen? Well, it turns out that you see and hear things separately. And since, as we know, the speed of light is faster than the speed of sound, if the car is far enough away, you actually see the door shut long before you hear it slam. So what do you think will happen when we do that with the car in the middle? It's a little more difficult to tell, right? As it turns out, the real magic doesn't happen until you get a little bit closer.
Did you notice? This time the sight and the sound of the door closing seems perfectly in sync. What do we do differently? Nothing. The sight and the sound still arrived at your eyes and ears separately. But because this car was closer, your brain connected the two and made them seem like they were simultaneous. In fact, any difference of sight and sound less than about 1/10 of a second, and your brain will connect them and make them seem to be simultaneous.
The reason is the brain buffers information. It sort of holds it back until it's got all the information. Now, over 60 metres, there's a time difference. But the brain only decides at 60 metres to make the difference. Up until then, it accommodates.
Oh, that isn't a standard because of the speed of sound?
No, that's the brain. No. It is. There is no gradation. It is literally at 60 metres, suddenly there's a gap. But before then, there isn't. Now, this is again something similar to something called the phi phenomenon. And the phi phenomenon is really intriguing. A guy called Nelson Goodman first came up with this in 1969. It's to do with the idea of seeing a moving object. We see movement happens in what 24 images to the second or whatever it is that gives you the illusion of movement. But your brain actually, your visual system is taking if I do that, your brain is taking a series of still images and it links them together to give the illusion of movement, just like cinema works. Yeah. Now, the Gestalt psychologists were very much interested in this. And they said, what about a scenario where you have a series of lights? So you have a white light and then a series of white lights like that. and you switch them on and off. So you start, that light gets switched on, goes off, and the next light comes on, off, on, off, on, and then goes backwards again. If you time it well, what you actually see is a white light just going backwards and forwards, because you can understand that.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what Nelson Goodman said is, what would happen the first time if the light at the end changes from, say, white to red? So the last light is light is red. So you can understand. So it would be white, 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 and then red.
Yeah.
Logically, it must be that it would be white, 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 and you see it go red at the end. And it would be literally a moving light that suddenly goes red. Every human being that does this experiment, the first time the light changes in the middle. And that is before the person even knows what that colour is going to be. That is precognition.
Is that the brain buffering again?
It's the brain buffer. It's either, there's only two, well done, there's only two alternatives here. It's the brain buffering. So what the brain does, it waits until it's got all the information, then back creates.
Yeah.
But even that means that the human mind is going backwards in time to recreate it in some way. So this is again with the binding problem, because the binding problem, somewhere in the head it all comes together, as if there's a little homunculus in your head. Do you remember the numbskulls from years ago? I don't know if you do, you're probably too young to know that. There's a cartoon characters, there's a little group of people inside your head, and there's a little guy with a little earphone, and there's a little guy with a little camera.
Oh, yeah.
and
Was it a
everything.
comic?
It was the comic.
Yeah,
Big Man,
remember,
I think.
yeah.
So this is called, technically it's called the homunculus theory. It's the idea there's a little version of you in your head that has eyes and ears and everything else. But that's an infinite regress, because it means that little creature would also need to have eyes and ears, and it goes backwards and forwards, backwards. So this was one of the problems with the homunculus theory. Because then they found, well, is there a place in the brain where it all comes together? You know, where the little signals, they all come together at that point. There is nowhere. They've never found it. Which means that you are spread all over your brain. Now, if you are all spread all over your brain, how does the visual system down here, with the hearing system here, and the various other things, your somosensory positioning, how does it all come together? And that's the binding problem, because they don't know. Now, according to this new hypothesis, well, it's not that new, but it's comparatively new, the idea is that in some way, the communication channels can create something immediate. It's like it's a kind of an overbrain.
Okay.
Now, again, there's lots of research done at the moment. There's a guy I know called John Joe McFadden, Professor John Joe McFadden at Surrey University. He's a molecular biologist. And he argues that what we're looking for, when we're looking for consciousness in the brain, consciousness is not in the neurons, it's in a field of energy around each neuron. So the consciousness is not in the neurons, it's outside it, it's quantum.
Okay.
Which means that the brain works on quantum physics. Now, on reading more about this hypothesis, it's a guy called Tonini, and also a guy called Christoph Koch, I think it is. And the two of them come up with this hypothesis. But on reading the original papers, it's far more exciting than I first thought, because I was quite dismissive of it initially. And what it's actually saying is that the whole is greater than the parts. And they use the argument that, in fact, you can extend that to groups of people. You get a group of people like us here. We're all thinking the same way. We're thinking in unison. We are all attuned to each other. Now, in esoteric law and in magical law, what we're creating here is called an egregore. An egregore is the consciousness of the collective group. The idea that a group of people together, when they work together, can create something greater than them.
I've seen something on that. Was it Navy SEALs or something? Like they have this.
Yeah.
I can't
They
remember.
work together as a
and it's
unison.
they say the sort of consciousness switches to
A collective group
Yeah, so
consciousness.
that is what makes a good. I think it was Navy SEALs.
Yeah.
That is what.
Now,
yeah.
what is particularly intriguing about this is that it can be applied to an effect known in quantum physics called a Bose-Einstein condensate. A Bose-Einstein, the best example I know of a Bose-Einstein condensate is a laser. Okay. What happens is that you'll get individual subatomic particles, but they become entangled. A larger group of particles start to become reacting as one particle, which is what a laser does. Now, Bose-Einstein condensates are really intriguing structures. again, there's evidence that what happens with Bose-Einstein condensate may be even evidence again of this simulation, because within a Bose-Einstein condensate there's an awful lot of elements of holography and holograms going on. Now, with holograms, for example, within a hologram, if you take a holographic image and you smash it, you don't get, like a jigsaw puzzle, you take it apart, you get a denuded image of the total image. So a hologram, every part of a hologram contains the whole.
Oh, is it? Oh,
Okay.
I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
Now, this is what they think the universe is. The universe works holographically, which means that the Andromeda galaxy is in your teardrop.
Yes.
And that there is no outside of the universe, because people talk about, is there outside of the universe? There is no outside, because it is enclosed within itself. And this is applying the work, again, of a guy called Professor David Bohm, who was an American quantum physicist. And in the 1960s and 70s, he came up with an idea, I think it was in the early 1980s, I think. He wrote a book called Science and the Implicate Order, or something of that nature. And his argument is that everything is enfolded in itself. And that what happens is the human mind creates distance. The human mind creates the distance between objects. There is no out there. There is no space. There is no time. It's just the human mind creates this in order for us to exist within this scenario. Which is a very intriguing idea. And it's becoming more and more interesting because, for instance, there's a guy called Richard Feynman, who was one of the most famous and most popular American quantum physicists of the late 20th century. He was a bongo player and he was a real cool dude. He was the guy that actually sorted out the O-rings problems when the Challenger crashed,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
the shuttle disaster.
Yeah.
He was the guy that actually sussed it out. Very charismatic character. He once suggested that why it is that all electrons are identical. Because you can't tell sometimes they're identical to each other. And he said that's because they're the same particle. Every electron is just one electron travelling at infinite speed. And it just zips around and it creates this, but it's just one.
There's only one.
There's only one. Now, again, this would explain why they're all identical. It would explain lots of things. Now, the point you mentioned earlier, which I thought was interesting, the idea of we only use 10% of our brains. People use that term a lot. But in my last book, I talk about what that actually means. Do you know what that means when people say we only use 10% of our brains?
No.
Okay.
Ability, is it?
No.
The ability of it?
It's the structure of the brain. 10% of our brains are made up of neurons. And neurons are the things that people believe create you and me and create consciousness and everything else. But 90% of the brain is not made of neurons. It's made of something called the astroglial network, the glial cells. Now, glial is German for glue, because literally that's what they thought glial cells were there, to hold the neurons in place. But nature is parsimonious. It doesn't just do things for no reason. They can't just be there for no reason.
Yeah.
Latest research, and I mentioned this in my book, The Infinite Minefield, Infinite Minefield, is that it's the glial network that creates consciousness. Because the glial network, they're discovering now, there's something called a calcium ion wave that crosses the brain. It's almost instantaneous communication across the brain. And it works non-locally, non-locality in quantum physics. And this, I think, would explain the binding problem. Because the brain works far more interestingly than we can genuinely believe. And it's one of the areas I'm going to be trying to research in my next book. And that's why I've split the new book into 2 parts. Because I think there's so much science I'm now applying that I need a book that will be just full of entity encounters throughout history. And then the second book will be, well, what's the science? Where are entities? Are entities coming through? What is an entity? What are we talking about when somebody sees a goblin, or somebody sees a jinn, or somebody sees a ghost or a poltergeist? What are these things? Now, there's a guy called Paul Eno, who is an American researcher, and Paul has this fascinating concept of these entities actually being a form of psychic vampire. They feed on fear, and they generate fear in you, and it is their sustenance. I want to do the science of that. I want to say, well, if this is the fact, I don't just make statements like that. I want to know, well, if they were, what are they made of?
Is that something the Archontic energy that
Archon.
David that David Icke talked about, isn't it? The archontic energy.
What, as in archons?
Yeah, archons. Yeah.
The archons, yeah. No, I think that we can call them many things, but I think archons is as good as any, because archons is from Gnostic tradition.
Yeah, Gnostics. Yeah.
And Gnosticism is something I write about quite regularly. And the Gnostics idea is, and again, if you look at the Gnostics ideas, the Gnostics were a schismatic Christian sect in the 1st and 2nd century AD, then morphed into being the Cathars, the Cathari, the Albigenesians, moved into Sufis and Gnostics, the Kabbalists and Gnostics, and the idea is it's how to get over something called theodicy. In theology, theodicy is the idea of why evil exists. In other words, if a good God created this world, as the religious people believe, why does evil exist?
Donna's got the answer for that.
I haven't.
You did. You said it was the shadow.
Well, I think it's like a collective thing, yeah, that's trying to show us something. But
well, the argument
goes more deeper than that.
The Gnostics argue that it's because this is a simulation, this is Maya, this has been created by something they call the demiurge, the half-creator, the God that thinks he's God but isn't.
Yeah.
And if you look at the Old Testament, there are two creation myths. The first creation is the creation supposedly of the real God, and the second, I mean, this is all just theoretical stuff and it's not something I necessarily believe, but I think within myths are truths, and you find the truths. The creation myth, the first creation myth, and there's the second creation myth, which is Jehovah, you know, the God that's smiting people, that destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, and did all these terrible things. That's called Yaldabaoth. Yaldabaoth is the half-creator. But there's a God behind God, and there's a place behind this reality, which the Gnostics call the pleroma. It's the fullness, okay? And this is the kenoma. This is we are existing within the kenoma, which is the emptiness. And these are terms I'm going to be using in my new book about where these entities come from. The entities come from a place between the pleroma and the kenoma. There's a kind of an overlap place where these creatures seem to come through to and can actually manifest within this reality. They also argue that these creatures are the archons. The archons are kind of the supposedly the rulers of this world. Now again, in DMT, I think the archons are the snakes. You know, in DMT mythology, the idea that people see snakes, and the snakes, for instance, there's one thing I put in the new book which always amuses me, was I think it was Harner, who was an anthropologist who took DMT, and while he was in his DMT sequence, these lizard come snake entities start mocking him and saying, you know, we're lords of the universe, you know, we've created everything like this, you're just nobody, you're a human nothing. And he comes out of it really quite nervous, and he speaks to an old shaman, an old blind shaman, and he describes the creatures to the old blind shaman, and he said they were like bats, because obviously they didn't know how lizards or whatever work, I don't know, but he had to explain it. And the old blind shaman goes, he said, yeah, they're bullshitters, they always say that. He said, don't believe them, they always say that. And I thought, wonderful, because that's what's really going on. These are fooling us.
Yes.
You know.
Even in other realities we're being fooled.
Yeah. And these are the archons. And the question is, you know, do they really exist? If they do, what is the science behind them? You know. And I think I can pull something together that will have a logic to it. And I'm only about halfway through getting the ideas together, but I think I can do a neurological model for this. Because, for instance, I mean, as a final point, I mean, one of the things that in one of my books really, really intrigued me. Have you come across the concept of Kakara Mudra? Okay. Kakara Mudra is when people are in deep meditative states, and whatever, they feel that at the back of their throat is a taste. It's called the nectar of transcendence. It's a kind of an acidic taste. And
is this about the pineal gland?
Correct. Correct. The idea is that what I'm suggesting is that when we go back, Kakara Mudra, what people do is they train themselves to place the tongue at the back of the throat so that they can taste this nectar and they can have like a vague DMT experience internally. Now, what is very intriguing about this is you can actually map this neurologically, because at the 49th day of gestation, within the womb, the baby, the back of the throat, the pineal gland and the pituitary gland are together, called an epiphysis. And it sits at the back of the throat. And from the 49th day of gestation, it starts to move up to the centre of the brain. And as it moves up, it leaves a little cleft called Rathke's pouch or Rathke's cleft. And then it moves up to the centre of the brain, and the pineal gland splits off and the pituitary gland, and they become separate.
Yeah.
Now, in my book, The Infinite Mind Field, I apply this, and I suggest that what can be taking place, and again I'm going to be doing the neurochemistry of this in the new book, the science book, is that the pineal gland actually creates something called melatonin. And melatonin is the thing that makes you go to sleep. It's melatonin that puts you in that kind of alternate sleep state that we were talking about, hypnagogia and hypnopompia. Now, I think melatonin starts to open the doors of perception, to bring about us perceiving the wider world, perceiving the pleroma, for want of a better term. But the human body and the pineal gland can take melatonin and can synthesize it and change its chemical structure, because if you look at the chemical structure of melatonin and you look at the chemical structure of DMT, they're virtually identical. All that needs to happen is certain structures of the atomic structure just has to change. When it's changed, you can then change melatonin to what Beach Barrett, who's an associate of mine in America, calls metatonin, which is endogenous DMT. That is then created by the pineal gland, and of course, for certain people, it can leak. If it's creating it, it can leak down Rathke's pouch, the back of the throat, which is what these guys are trying to taste. Okay. Now, I believe that the Lucium light device that we'll have at the Draculo Caves, this stimulates the pineal gland to do this, and I know because it happened to me. When I was first invited over to the to witness the Lucia device in Switzerland about 9 to 10 years ago, the reason I was invited over was that one of the inventors, Engelbert Winkler, read my first book, Is There Life After Death? And it explained his near-death experience that he had as a child, and he wanted to meet me. And he was keen to show me this machine. Now, Engelbert Winkler is one of Austria's top consultant psychologists, and his associate, Dirk Procol, Dr. Procol, is one of the top consultant neurologists in the country. Okay, so these are top serious guys.
Yeah.
And they pulled together this machine. Now, they bring it into me, and it works on a principle of stroboscopic light and pure white light in sequences. And I sit in front of it, and I see all the flickering light, and nothing happened for the first 5 or 10 minutes, and I'm thinking, oh God, this is going to be so embarrassing. How can I tell them that nothing's happened? And then bang. Red light comes shooting, no, blue light comes over this angle, red light over there, starts swirling into a tunnel, and then I'm sitting in the chair, and then I see a breakdown in my visual field down here. And I said to them, can I look down to see, because something's going on here? And they said yes. This is all on YouTube, by the way. They filmed this, so it's
I
on
watched
YouTube.
it earlier.
You did, you see me doing it?
You saw the grid?
Yeah, I looked down,
this.
and I saw what I can only describe as the astral plane. I saw the surface of a planet, I saw the curvature of the planet, there were blue lights and a checkerboard, flickering lights, and I panicked and I asked them to switch it off. Okay, so switch it off, it all disappears. Then I'm talking to them, and together with Dr. Arthur Funkhauser, who's one of the world's leading authorities in déjà vu, came over to meet me, because in fact he was interviewed here for an American thing a few months ago. Because when I'm talking to them, like this, it's really weird. There were little creatures moving around in the centre of my head. And all through the night, I'm talking to people, and every couple of minutes, bzzz, I'm going, oh, for Christ's sake.
Activated your pineal
Yeah,
gland or
it had.
something.
It opened my third eye, is the only thing I can explain. I go to bed that night, I have the most vivid dreams, and I dream of snakes.
Oh.
I dreamt snakes looking at me. Now, this is exactly what is described so many times by people who take DMT. What is the snakes thing? You know, what's the snakes thing? What's the machine elves? You know, Terence McKenna and the machine elves. You know, what are these things? Now, every time I try to go to Breaking Convention, have you been to Breaking Convention?
No.
Whoa, you've got to go to it. Every 2 years, there's a big event at the University of Greenwich over a weekend. Last time there was over 1,000 people at it. People come from all over the world. There are 4 lectures happening concurrently all through 3 days.
Okay.
And it's wonderful because you get people who, it's mostly about DMT, entheogens, altered states of consciousness, but you get the world's leading speakers there. You know, I'm not saying I'm the world's leading speaker, but I spoke 4 years ago there on DMT and on the thing I've just been talking about now. Well worth going to. Myself and a group of friends will be going, we always do. We have a great time.
Have you had your own experience on DMT?
No, because it's
bother?
illegal.
So have they actually
No.
proven that DMT
Oh,
is
because it's illegal.
It's because it's illegal and because I prefer to report what other people have. But I know there's a major criticism said, well, if you've never used DMT, how can you write about it? Well, because I know so many people who have experienced it, and I feel that I can slightly move away from it and try to be more objective about people's experiences and look at them, because I feel it will blow my mind. And if it does, whether I'll be
It's
able
not
to
for everyone. If you haven't got that feeling, that call in and out.
Blow your mind as in you never be able to...
No, just
Cope
something
again.
that I don't know whether it's something I particularly want to do. Which
Then you don't need to do it.
Well, it's probably because I'm a
That's
coward.
it.
You know, I had them switch the machine off, didn't I? You know, that's how brave I am.
If you're not feeling it, that's it.
So hallucinogenics, not your thing.
No. People keep saying to me I should do it, and you know, that I've been offered circumstances many times, but I haven't. But that is a major criticism, and I'd make a major criticism myself on that. But at some stage, maybe I will. But at the moment, I'd like to be the outsider describing the experiences that other people
I
have.
think a lot of the DMT thing, it comes to you at a time when you want to do it. A lot of people will go, I've been looking for it for ages, and then you popped up, or this
I
popped
said
up.
to myself, when I first heard about it, I want to do that, and
Yeah.
it was a very strong, I want to do this, and I tried so hard, when like it was the same with the out of body experience, and I thought, you know, if it comes to me, I'll do it. And it came.
And then it pops up.
And maybe, you know, people keep telling me, you know, that, but I felt that I didn't need it because the Lucia did it.
Yeah.
But then again, how do I know?
Yeah.
Now, how can I compare it
Cross-reference it.
and reference it in any way? I can't. But when we do the Dracula Caves event, we're going to be putting people into this state, you know.
You better warn them.
Oh, totally.
Big disclaimer.
There's a big disclaimer. There has to be.
Yeah.
The Lucia is powerful.
One of them start running off down one of them caves.
I know, it's my
The
nightmare.
light goes off.
I know, it's my nightmare. They go running off and we can't find them.
Have to get them little fellas in, the miners that went and got the kids out of the water.
Yeah,
Oh,
let's go
yeah.
do that.
Take a week or two to find them.
Well, they do say when I was there recently, they said whatever you do, keep your car keys zipped in. Do not lose your car keys because car keys disappear down there.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, you can zip them, you can't disappear. But on top of that, batteries drain.
Yeah.
You can have full charged up batteries and they'll drain within minutes.
Strange goings on
Oh,
down there.
One of the strange goings on, one of the guys told me, and he said that he told me about it, and then when I was down there, he explained it to me where it was. I was standing in the place, and he told me they were standing at a junction of two corridors. Well, there was actually a crossroads of corridors, and the entity. What had happened was they had realised that the entity was communicating with them because I think something along the lines there was banging, and somebody turned around and said, "If you are actually banging, what's 2 and 2?" And they 4 bangs. And they went, shit. Woo. You're really thinking, really out there, bang. So one of the guys said, okay, if you're really there, I want you to show me by throwing this back to me. And he had an empty can of Pepsi. And he threw it down one of the corridors into the dark. And they heard it bounce. And then it landed over here. And he showed me, he said, that's where it landed there. And I threw it over there. And they heard it land go bunk, bunk, bunk. And I'm standing there in the very place and shivers up my spine. But the worst thing is, he then had on his phone, he had a film that somebody had done, standing where we were. And you're looking down this dark corridor and there's an archway, completely black. And he showed me the photograph and the film, and you can see within the archway is a human figure, like that, and a pair of legs, and it's like a star being. The actual, what should be blackness, there are stars and colours. And I said, is that really serious? And he said, yeah, that's what they took the photograph of. He said, no idea what it is. And I said, oh, can I put it on YouTube? Can I put it on Facebook? He said, no, I can't because it belongs to somebody else. But wow, you know, that's the kind of things that are down there, you know.
But your mind's, you're infinitely cleverer than all of us put together. No, as in reference, whatever we talk about.
Yeah.
So why do you fear it? What's the?
I didn't fear it. I thought.
No, but when you talk, you go.
Yeah, whoa.
Yeah,
I suppose
yeah.
it's a reaction.
Wow, wow.
I think it's the wow factor. I think
Yeah,
it's
wow.
it's the evidence that there is something else, going on. Because I've been interested in ghosts and everything ever since I was a kid, but I've never actually seen manifestations like
So
that.
you need to see nuts and bolts stuff.
Oh yeah, totally. I am an arch skeptic. I will only accept things when I can rationalise them in my own mind.
When there's absolutely no other explanation.
But you go for the furthest, more simple, Occam's razor, you go for the most simple explanation initially. And then, if you can't explain it, you then move on.
Yeah.
I mean, I know of, for instance, when I first wrote my book, The Out-of-Body Experience, I was approached by a guy called Graham Nichols, who is an out-of-body trainer, because I said the out-of-body experience is actually an internal journey. You don't go outside your body. There's no evidence of referential information. He said, yes, there is, because it's happened to me. So Graham and I have become now very good friends. And Graham told me at one event that he has witnessed by other people. He was training people, and he suddenly felt his knees go, fell to the ground. Next thing he comes to, he's in a jungle. You can feel the heat around him, and there's plants around him. And he said, I walked forward, parted the plants, stepped out, and I was on the corner of Wardour Street and Old Compton Street in Soho. And he's going, what? And he said, a lad rang past me, and I felt the wind displacement of the kid ran past. And he said, I then looked down the street, and suddenly there's this huge explosion. And people are staggering out covered in blood, and there's sirens going off and everything else. And then he could hear people going, Graham, Graham. And it's the people in the lecture theatre trying to bring him to. And he said he suddenly finds himself rising up, and he's coming to on the floor of the lecture theatre. First thing he says when he comes to, there's going to be a terrorist attack in Soho soon. 5 witnesses to this, all signed affidavits. 5 days later, the Admiral Benbow pub, Admiral Duncan pub in Soho, the bomb, the nail bomb that killed all the gay people. Yeah. Exactly where he said it was.
Wow.
Exactly. That is irrefutable.
Yeah.
The only thing you can say is coincidence.
I've had out-of-body experience, and I've confirmed it with myself by what I saw, and then I had them come down and confirm it for me. So I do.
Because with that, the argument would be, God, it's a coincidence. Yeah, well, if he'd had a dream that he'd seen, or an out-of-body experience, he'd seen a plane crash somewhere. Yeah, law of large numbers, what Richard Wiseman says. There will be a plane crash somewhere in the world within the next few weeks, so you claim it's that. But come on, the idea that there's going to be a bomb in Soho in this place. And there's another associate of mine, Jim, and Jim had a dream where he was in a hotel room. He knew it was a foreign town, and he goes to the window and he notices it's winter because the trees haven't got leaves on, and there's an airport. And he sees Concorde go past with its back on fire. And then he watches as it crashes. And not only this, but as it crashes, he feels people going through him speaking in German, because he speaks German. And the voices were saying, my God, what's happened? Where are we going? What's going on? What's happened? Oh God, this is awful. And they went through it. He was so intrigued by this, he sent a fax to British Airways and said, a Concorde will crash somewhere in Europe in the next few months.
It's the Paris one, wasn't it?
It's the Paris one. And if you know the image, the plane was on the back. Yeah. But the fascinating thing was, the people who died on it were German. Because they were a German tour that had hired it. How can you ever say that is coincidence? How many levels of evidence do you need before you adapt the fact that Jim was precognitive?
Yeah.
I don't believe in coincidence at all. At all.
For the reasons, aren't they?
Well, for the reasons we talked earlier, everything is laid out every day for you, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know.
Absolutely.
And once you accept it, it's trying to make other people accept it.
Well, they won't.
Well, you don't have to.
You don't have to. In the end, you give up.
Yeah, you give up in the end.
They're in denial.
But it's nice to have people confirm.
They're in denial. I mean, for instance, my wife. There was an incident. I was in our previous house. I was sitting one Sunday morning at the computer in the study. I heard her scream. So I thought, oh, it's Penny. Oh, there must be a mouse. There must be a spider in the bathroom or something. So I sit there, think for a few seconds. No, that doesn't feel right. I get up, and I decide to run to the bottom of the stairs. As I run to the bottom of the stairs, she's in mid-air coming down the stairs. Oh. I was able to manoeuvre myself, catch her, put my hand around her head to stop her smashing into a door butt. We sat there and shook for about 20 minutes. And then I turned around to Penny and I said, when did you scream? And she said, when I started to fall.
So you heard it before?
And I said, that's impossible. And again, on Facebook, I do a video of how long it took me to get from that point to the bottom of the stairs. Penny doesn't believe. She still, if you meet her in a few minutes' time, she still will say.
She was just walking down there.
She'll say, I don't know, I couldn't explain it. But it doesn't shake her belief that this reality can be stretched. Because that wasn't just me moving fast. It's more than that. I managed to dilate time in some way to save her life because she would have been killed.
Is that the stress of it? That's when you're under stress.
Yeah, I think it's the stress. But
when you're in the extreme.
But it doesn't explain how I could cover that distance that fast.
But you didn't do it by choice.
No.
It was forced upon you.
Yeah.
So do you think anybody's worked out how to do it, how to manipulate it?
Well, there is the argument. People talk about the way in which you can manipulate time and space. Sportsmen use it.
Yeah,
it's this in the zone.
Tennis players,
and you're in the zone. And once you're in the zone, you can bend reality.
There's a lot of things when you get into that zone. Have you experienced when you're in the zone, you just doing something without effort?
Yeah,
it's
wonderful.
It's a great place to
I
be.
remember once scoring a goal when I was a kid, and I've never been able to repeat it. And it was a daisy cutting volley, and it was just so sweet, and I just hit it. And it was zoom, and I knew the goalkeeper wasn't going to get it. And I'll never forget that. That was the best goal I'd ever scored.
I've experienced it in a school again, but it was like a game around us or something, and it was like our group must have we talk about the unity consciousness because the whole group just seemed to have this vibe and was in, and we slammed it And there was a feeling to it, like we're in the zone.
Yeah,
we're together.
Teams, don't they? They almost look like they communicate with each other.
Well, my little group when we meet. When I used to meet, there's a little group I have down in London, but also when I was up on Merseyside, there was a little group we used to meet, and we'd talk like this all afternoon. There would be about 6 or 7 of us, and it would just be great. And the ideas would spin out, and it was just wonderful. I really do miss those times. Again, if you're interested in that group, they're called the It Lad Walker group. They have a Facebook group, so it's It Lad, which is Their Life After Death. In fact, my first book. There you go, you're all more Scouse now, isn't it? Great, fantastic that, isn't it? No, because I did for 2 years a thing on BBC Radio Merseyside with Billy Butler, which was quite good. We had some quite interesting things there. Right, I'm aware of time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's been a great interview.
Fantastic.
Good.
Fantastic. We'll put the links of your website.
Excellent. Wonderful.
Oh, good. And do you know? Have you got a date when your book's out? Do you not know yet?
The book will be out. I think it's the 10th of December.
10th of December. Right.
Great Christmas present then.
Yeah.
Perfect time.
But I have to deliver the manuscript, and I've got to deliver it by the end of May. So at the moment, I'm at that point of pulling it together, and it always amazes me that it always does come together.
It will do.
At the moment, I've got so much material.
You've been very quiet, Paul.
Just enjoying the moment.
You're in the zone. In the place.
I'm enjoying it so much. Yeah.
Right. It's been really good, Anthony.
Wonderful. Thank you for coming down. I'm honoured.
Sorry we kept you so late.
Yes.
That's all right.
Delay.
It's all right.
Yeah.
I'm 25 for you.